Hi everybody, welcome back to my virtual art tutorials. So for those of you who have seen a few of these before, lovely to bring you another one of these. If you're new to this, welcome. My name is Emma Morrissey, and I'm really pleased to bring another one of these virtual sessions for Creative Wellness Journey. So what I wanted to do today is something a bit different. So there won't be any reference photos or anything like that that you'll need to refer to for this. I wanted to do an abstract art based tutorial because this is something that really anybody can do. You don't need to have any sort of art experience or art knowledge or anything like that. All you need is any materials that you have to hand. So if you want to use paint, I've got watercolour here that I'm going to use. If you want to use felt tips, I've got some markers, but equally if you want to use pencils, crayons, chalks, anything you have to hand will be wonderful for this, because this is all about colour and shapes, line, form, those sorts of things, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that as I sort of get into this, okay? So first of all, just think about what you want to actually use. I'll just try and adjust my camera a little bit here. And the only thing you need to be aware of is if you're using anything that's wet, so any type of paint, if you do want to use anything on top of it, like pens or pencils, pens especially, make sure that the paint has dried before you put pen on top of it, because you will ruin your pens if your paper is still wet, okay? So first of all, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about abstract art. Some of you might have heard of an abstract art form known as Cubism. So there are a couple of quite well-known artists who sort of made this art movement quite famous. One was Pablo Picasso, and the other one was Georges Braque. And basically, with a lot of Cubism, what happens is you're simplifying whatever it is that you're wanting to paint or draw. So think of something as when we actually look at it, it's 3D, but when you're drawing it in a cubist way, it becomes 2D, so it flattens everything. So if we look at my hand, for example, it's three-dimensional. We can see there are shadows and there are highlighted areas. If you want to make that sort of simplified, what you would do is you would just focus on the shapes. So there would be some oblongs, maybe some triangles, some squares, and you take all the shadows, shades and highlights away and just use block colours so it looks much flatter. Okay, and that would be the same for anything if you're painting a flower or a cup or anything at all. And one of the other things that you may be aware of is how to use colour and line in abstract art. So another quite well-known artist is Pierre Mondrian, and what he did was, in sort of his early practice, he would have sort of shapes, lines and colour, and he would sort of just put them down on the canvas, but there would be spaces and gaps, and then later on he started to move and place these blocks, squares of colour closer together, and that changes the composition, and that's what we're going to do a little bit of today. So the first thing that I would suggest you do is go with any colour you like. So don't worry about being specific, and just start anywhere. Okay, so I'm just going to start putting a bit of colour down here, and I'm not going to worry about being specific. And the whole point of this is just to start experimenting with colour, with shape, and as you go you might find that you just instinctively start sort of doing certain things, making certain marks, and this is what mark making is all about, because this is how you're making marks. So how I just sort of made a mark on the paper, I'm using mixed media paper. So if you are using anything that's wet, then watercolour paper, mixed media paper will work very well. If you've only got sketch paper, that will be okay too. You just might find that the paper will warp a little bit more because it's not designed specifically to take water. But you can see I've just decided to change this into a oblong shape. So just have fun with it, just experiment a little bit. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep making some marks. Just randomly dot them around. You can use different colours. And obviously if you're using watercolour, like I am here, the more water you use with the colour will make it lighter, so it will be paler. If you have got a lot more paint than water, then of course it will be a much more vibrant, sort of stand out tone of colour that you create. Okay, so if I then just dip this into my water here and do it again, you'll see it's a little bit paler. Watercolour dries much paler, so if you want a colour to really stand out a bit more, then you need to add a bit more water to it. I'm aware that I've got my sort of paint palette halfway over my page, so I'm going to have a little bit of a gap in a minute, so I will move that. So at the moment I'm just starting to sort of fill this in. Okay, and I'm not being specific about it, I'm not really thinking about anything. All I'm doing is just filling the page. Okay, so that's all you need to do, just fill the page. Use as many or as little colours as you like. You can do this all in one colour if you prefer. But as I said just now, there are lots of different ways that artists have used sort of abstract art in the past, and it's really about using colour, form, line, instead of sort of something which would automatically be quite realistic. And the great thing about this is you can use your favourite colours if you want to, and each time you do something in this style it will be completely different. In terms of composition, you'll find that depending on what colours you're using, it will change the mood, so to speak, of your painting. Because obviously if you're using sort of brighter colours, if you're using pale colours compared to using sort of darker colours, that sort of creates a certain mood. If you're using a lot of darker colours, it might maybe depict something at night time. So colour is really, really important here in terms of how that affects the composition. But as I said, use whatever colours you like. So I'm using pretty much every colour that I have available. I will go in with some blue in a moment. And for me, I'm using quite a lot of sort of oblong and square shapes. So because I've just sort of become really aware of that, I'm going to start to put some circles in here just to break it up. And you'll see how that completely changes the composition. It changes the mood. Might make it sort of a little bit more playful. So as I said, there's absolutely no right and wrong in this. You can also use colours to outline, sort of to create a little bit of a border, so to speak. I'm going to go into a little bit of blue now, and I've mixed that with my green. So you get sort of a bluey green colour. So I'm just going to keep building this up. And as each little portion of this dries, I'm then going to go over some of it with my pens. Now, as I said, you can use anything you like. If you're using quite a thick paint like poster paint or acrylic, what you could do is you could absolutely just sort of scrape some of the paint on. But if you wanted to do anything on top of that, make sure that it has dried before you go on top of it with something like pen, because You can go through quite a few pens and destroy your pens that way. Right, so I'm just going to do a random circle. And just sort of go with the flow with it, just see what happens. And if you sort of put a colour down, you think, oh, that looks quite interesting, just keep building it up. Go with your instinct. Now, if you're using sort of a navy blue, like I've started to put in here, that does change the composition. It makes it a little bit bolder, stands out more. So I have sort of instinctively started to use it sort of to outline because it has that bold element to it, because it's a dark blue as opposed to a sort of paler duck egg blue, so to speak. But obviously, as I said, if you're using watercolour, the more water you add, the paler that colour will become. So what you can do is you can essentially create lots and lots of different versions of one colour just by using different amounts of water to paint ratio each time you use it. A little top tip that I'll give you, and this will work with any type of paint, whether you're working with watercolour paint or poster paint or acrylic paint, oils as well, is if you want a tint or a highlight of a colour, you add white to it. If you want a tone of it, you add a bit of grey. If you want a shade of it, you add a little spot of black, and that will give you various different tones, as I said, tints and shades of one colour. Okay, so I'm just going to keep building this up. I've pretty much just started to use a little bit of water now just to get the very most I can out of this paint. Again, as I said just now, watercolour dries much paler, so I know that even seeing this really sort of pale blue that I've got here, I know it will be much paler than that once it's dry. And once you've started to do a few things, just sort of have a little look at it and sort of look at it from afar, hold it at arm's length or stand back from it and just see if you feel you need to add anything, if you need to put a different colour in. So I feel that I need something a bit more up here. So I'm sort of going for a bit of structure. And by using colour sort of to create form, we're using it sort of as a line. And this is what gives it a sort of structural value. It changes the composition completely. And that changes the mood and the feel. So all these things, I think sometimes we don't really even tend to think about, you know, particularly with this type of artwork, abstract art, because it's all about expression. So you may have heard it's also called abstract expressionism. So it's about creating expression and using colour, shape and form to express something, and that could be what colours represent to you emotionally. So a lot of people represent the colour blue with sadness, but some people also sort of think of blue as a very calm colour. So it represents different things to different people. So it's also worth thinking about what colours you're using, to think what type of mood you want to portray in any sort of art pieces that you'd like to do. There's no right and wrong way to do this. If you make a mark and you think, oh, I'm not sure about that, don't worry about it, because it becomes an important part of your artwork. And as I said, the brilliant thing also about this style of artwork is it's relatively quick, so you can do quite a few of these in different colours, creating different patterns, different shapes each time, and you'll get a different result. And you might find that you have a favourite. There might be a piece you think, oh, I really like that. And the other thing is, even if you've created something like this, which is mainly just sort of colour, shape, line, form, it's sort of created something quite pattern in its appearance, is these make really good backgrounds for different things, for cards, quite nice just as gifts for people. All sorts of different things they can be used for if you do sort of any scrapbooking, art journaling as well, obviously. So I can see that some of this is still a little bit wet. What I'm going to do is just go into the dry areas with some of my pens. Now the ones I've got here are dual tipped. So we have a smaller tip on one end and a larger tip on the other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in with black. It's a very bold, very obvious sort of colour, and I'm just going to start to put some random lines in here. Now I'm just going to do a few of these just so that you can get a feel for what it's like to use more than one medium in your artwork. I'm just going to go around this circle a bit. As I said, the other lovely thing about this is it's completely your own, so you haven't sort of feel the need to base it on anything, unless you'd like to, of course. But you can absolutely just use any colours you like, create any shapes, lines, patterns, anything at all. And it will be different every single time you do it, which I really enjoy. So what I'm going to do is I'm just noticing some of these lines that I've created here. So I'm just going to go around some of them, because this will completely change the composition. And something else which is quite nice is you don't quite know how it's going to turn out until you've done it. And that can be quite relaxing in itself, really, because you're just letting stuff happen, and you know, hopefully that can be quite a relaxing process for people as well, which is really important for our well-being. And also, as I mentioned, you can use as many or as few materials you like in this. So obviously I've used watercolour paint and some marker pens, but you can use anything you like. Again, I'll just reiterate what I said earlier. If you are using paint, make sure it has dried before you put pen on top of it, because you will ruin your pens and you don't want to do that. So I'm just going to draw around this little shape that I've done. I'm going to start to add some lines in here as well. Again, it just sort of changes everything a little bit, changes the composition. It also helps sort of move your eye around to different points, and that's what composition is all about. It's sort of where it draws the eye, which bit you look at first, which bit you look at last. So that's why, as you sort of create art a little bit more and start experimenting with colour a bit more, you'll find that you might automatically put brighter colours in a certain area, which the eye automatically will tend to go to when we look at something. Okay, so I'm just going to put another little bit there. I'm going to put some circles here just because. So again, just make those decisions and don't worry about them, just go for it, just see what comes up. And anything that you put that's quite solid and quite precise, you'll notice your eye will start to go to those areas because they are bolder. So again, that changes the composition, as I mentioned just now. So all these things are quite important, but the good thing is when you're creating something like this, you sort of tend to forget about that because you just get lost in creating, which is the beautiful thing about this. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that. So that is a little introduction to creating abstract art, experimenting with colour, shape, form and line, and how we sort of think about composition. So I hope that you found that helpful, and hopefully I will see you again soon for another virtual session.